Hi, and welcome to this video, How do I create an advanced group in Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 R2. My name is Klaus Lundström, MVP for Microsoft Dynamics NAV. This video was made in cooperation with the training center Platan. At the end of this video, we will have created a report which prints two different data items, customers and vendors in one tablets control, and the header row of the tablets will be printed on each page even when the first data item has completed. So the objective of this video is to create a report with multiple data items from NAV, having everything in one tablet control in Visual Studio. Placing everything in one tablet control gives us the possibility to repeat the header rows in the tablet control on each new page. Something not possible when designing reports with multiple tablets since the header rows are local to each tablet and will only print as long as the tablet data is printing on the page. So by creating one tablet control in our report, we will be able to place many of the elements we usually have in the page header in the body of the report. Also, we'll make the header rows for each group repeat on new page, and here we'll run into a bug in Visual Studio 2013, and I will show you how to work around this. In step number 1, we're going to create the dataset NAV. First, create the report. Then we're going to create three text constants, which I'll be using in grouping in Visual Studio. We'll create a parent data item, a customer data item, and a vendor data item. The vendor data item will be adjacent to the customer data item. And then when we have done this, we'll preview the dataset in Excel before we do any layout in Visual Studio. So it's now time to create the report. I'll select New, and I go to View, go to Globals, and then here I want in the text constant, I want to create three groups that I'll be using later in Visual Studio. I will create a parent group, a customer group, and a vendor group. Now I want to create my data set, and the first thing I want to do is to create an integer here. I call this parent. In the parent here I want to have my parent group populated. My next will be the data item. This will be the customer data item. And in the customer data item I want a few fields, so I'll take my number and name and add this. Next will be my data item for my vendor. So I'll put data item here, and let's take the vendor table, and I want to add a few fields here. So I'll take number and name and hit OK. Now notice that the data item vendor is indented underneath the customer. I don't really want to have that. I want to have it on the same level. So I want the data item vendor to be adjacent to the customer data item. So I will take the indentation level one out. And I also see that I need to have the customer group here. So I'll add my customer group. And in the vendor, I need to have my vendor group. And one last thing before we end, we want to make sure that the integer only runs once. So I'll go to properties and I'll set the max iteration for 1 here for the integer. And I will now save my report. I will call 50,000 and I'll call this customer / vendor list and hit OK. So now I'm actually ready to run my report. So I'll run my report, say File, and Run. We haven't created any layout yet, so when we run the preview, the report of course will be empty. But what we want to view now is the data set. So I'll go Preview, and of course this is completely blank. There's nothing there. I want to go to the Help about this report, and in the Help about this report, I can see my my data set. I will put this in Excel, so I'll export that to Excel. In Excel, I can see several columns. I can see the parent group column, the number customer, name customer, customer group, number vendor, name vendor, and vendor group. So if I look at my data set over here in NAV, I can see the first column here is the parent group. This is this column. The next column is the customer number, name, and group. So underneath the data item. So these are these columns. And then I can see my data item vendor, which are here. So notice that my vendor columns don't have any data. Well, they do have data, but they don't have data in the beginning, because if we look at the data in dataset in NAV, we see that the first data item is the integer, is the highest indentation level, then the data item customer is then indented, and then the data item vendor is on the same level as the customer. So when the report is being the data set is being created, the first thing is that the parent group will run every time. So we can see the parent group here. Every time there's a row in our dataset created, the parent group will show up. But then we'll run through the customers, and when it's done with the customers, it will then create the data item. So that's why the vendors here is completely empty. So when we're done with the data item customer, we scroll down in Excel, we can see that the vendors come down here. So I have, I believe I have 68 vendors, and I have 68 customers in my data set right now. Having data items on the same indentation level in NAV is very common, and in the past when designing the layout in Visual Studio, multiple tablexes will have been used to view both the customers and vendors. But with this approach, you are required to place many elements in page header, but this is not necessary. As I said in the beginning, the objective of this video is to having everything in one tablex. So let's go and create the layout. So we're now step number 2. We'll be creating the group in Visual Studio. First, we'll start out putting in a tablet control, and then we will create a parent group on this, and we'll create a customer group and a vendor group, and in both these groups we'll add details row, and then we'll add columns, and then we'll view the report to see how it looks, and we will discover that we're missing filters on each of these groups, and then we'll filter on both the customer number for the customer group, and we'll filter on the vendor number for the vendor group. But let's have a look. Before we open up Visual Studio and design the layout, I would like to have my captions over. So I'm going to include my customer number, my customer name, and my vendor number and my vendor name caption. And I'm going to save my report, and now I will open up the layout. So go View, Layout. Visual Studio. So now we're in the Visual Studio and we want to create our report. So the first thing I will do is I will create or drag a table in to my report. Go to the top left corner, and I want to go down to the row groups down here, or the grouping window, which you can enable up here if it's not enabled. So in here I want to right click, and I want to go to the add group, and I want to create a parent group for now. Now you'll see when I click this drop down button here, you probably won't have anything, so it'll be blank. To enable to have something here visible so you can see what's in your dataset, you need to escape this window here, and you need to go to the tablex itself and go to the property of this tablex. And here you have to set the dataset name. So now I set the dataset name. I can go back to my grouping window, and I can right click, and I say add group and parent group. Now the first group that I want to have in my report is actually the child group. So this is the first child group that I have, and that is the customer group. So I'll group on the customer group. And for this scenario, I want to have a group header. So I'll hit OK. A column is being created, which I don't need, so I'm just going to delete this column. I won't go into details in this column in this video. Then I want to go down to my grouping window again. I want to go add group and parent group. And now for this group here, I want to have the parent group. I don't really, for this scenario, I don't need to have any group header or group footer for this parent group, so I'll just accept and say this is fine. And again, I get my nice little column that I don't need, so I'm just going to delete this and make sure that I only delete the columns and not the associated groups I just created. So I'll just delete the columns. So now I have my group, my first child group here, the customer group, and my parent group outside. And it's visible displayed how that is shown here in Visual Studio. So now I want to create another group that is adjacent to this group here. So I'll go customer, on the customer group, I'll go click on the add group, and I want to not parent or not child, but I actually have the adjacent after. So I'll hit adjacent after, and in here I want to hit the vendor group. So I want to group on the vendor group, which we saw before in our data set. So I'll hit OK, and now see that here, if you look very closely, that I now have a new group underneath the other child group. And we'll also look down in the grouping window. We see that I have a customer group, and we have details in the customer group, and we have a vendor group with no details. So let's go and add those details also for the vendor group. So I will right click the vendor group, say add group, and now I'm going to hit the child group, and then I'll click the show detailed data. So I won't group anything, just show detailed data and say OK. Notice that I now have a detail row for the vendor group and for a detail for the customer group. I don't want this column, so say delete again for this. So I have details now for both these groups here, and I just want to clean it a little bit up. So I have the customer group here, and I will call this the customer group details. And I will go down here, and I will call this guy the vendor group details. So now my report, all the groupings which I need is now created, and I can start adding my data to this report. First, I will put in my captions for this report, and it's in my view, report data, and it's in parameters. So I'll go to my customer number. I want to have this caption here, and the name caption here, and I want to have the number vendor caption here, and the name vendor caption here. Then I want to have the customer number here. I want to have the customer name here, and here I would like to have the number of the vendor and the name of the vendor. Notice that I get some hard-coded captions up here. I'm just going to delete those. I don't want to have these, so I'll just delete those. So I've created the groups and what I need to have in the groups. Also, I would like to have my row number shown. So I'll put this in, and I'll just say row number. And I will copy this to here, so it's the same. And in this expression, I will write, go to the comment function, go to miscellaneous, go to the row number, and then here I want to have the scope for my row number, and the scope right now is the customer group. Let's just copy this, because we're going to use this also for the vendor here. Let's go to the expression, and then we'll write vendor here instead. Then I want to add a few colors on my report. When I design reports, I use colors a lot. I use them for debugging, so I can see what is actually being produced when and where on my report. So right now I'm just going to take the header row here for the customer group, and I want to make this light blue. I want to take the details row for the customer group, and I'll make this orange. Say OK, and then I will take the group header for the vendor, and I'll make this light green. And for the bottom of the details of the vendor, I'll take the color, this brown color, tan, and say OK. Now I'd like to build my report, so I'll build my report, and I'll go back to NAV and run my report. I have now executed the report, and as you can see, I have a lot of blank rows. And if we go to the next page, now on page number 2, I see that I have 68 blank rows, and suddenly I now get my my customers starting coming here. And if I go to the next page, my customers keep going on. Remember, there was the customer group was the orange one, and if I go to the next page, my vendor starts coming out, and vendors has now blank rows and blank rows and blank rows, a lot of blank rows, and then my vendor comes in the end, and then it ends. So what's actually going on here? Well, if you remember, what I did was that I was grouping on the customer group, and if we look at the data set, so for the customer, I was grouping customer group, I was grouping on the customer group, and if we look at this, the outcome is it's either customer group or it's blank. So now if we take the blank, so let's say we filled out the customer group, and we say OK, we get all the vendors. So all the rows that we have here is all the vendors that are showing, and everything's blank here. Let's move all the blanks, and with the customer, so now we get all the customers. So that's what's going on here. It's exactly the same thing with vendor. So I always filter in in Excel, so it's easy for me to know exactly what filters I need to do over in Visual Studio. So what we need to do now is that we need to fill out all the blanks, so we get the customers showing in the customer group, and we can ignore all the vendor lines or vendor rows that we have in our data set. So let's go back to Visual Studio and make that change. So we're now in Visual Studio and we want to make a filter on the customer group. So I will go to the customer group, I'll go group properties, and in the group properties I will click on the filters, and in here I would like to include a new group filter. So I'll click the add button and I'll go into the expression. Here in the expression I will select create string and length, and then I will take the field that I want to filter on. I will take the customer number and in the parentheses. So I will now look at the length of the customer number value. So if the length is 0, well then there's nothing there. It's the vendors rows, and we don't want to see those. And I create a string so I can keep this value here as text. So that's the way I do filters all the time. Then I'll say different from 0 and say okay. So everything that's different from 0 will be shown, and anything that's 0 will not be shown. So I'll say OK, and I will do the exact same thing on the vendor, and I'll go to my group properties here, I'll go to my filter, I add, go to my expression, and I write create string and length, and I will take the fields, the customer number value, the vendor number, sorry, and I will say OK. And I'll say different from 0 and OK. Want to build my report, and now we can go back and run our report. So when we run the report again, we can now see that the groups has been filtered. So we only see the customers, and we don't see any blank rows now for the vendors. And we also see when we go to the third page that the vendor starts, and here also all the blank rows are gone. So we're done with this exercise, and now we need to make the header row here. Why we did this in the first place, put everything in one tablets. We want to make this header row here repeat, because right now it's not repeating. As you see, there's no repeating here. And we also want to make this group header repeat as long as the customer is repeating. So that's what we're going to be doing now. So now we're at step number 3. The most important part of this video, because now we make the header row in our tablets repeat on each new page. When we are done this, we'll also make the customer group header repeat as long as we have customers in the dataset. And finally, we'll do the same on the vendor group, where we unfortunately will run into a bug in Visual Studio 2013, and I will show you how to work around this issue. So we are now back in Visual Studio, and we're going to have a look at the header row. First, I would like to make this header row, all the columns here, I want to merge them. I can merge them here with this one, merge cells. And then I want to put in a little text. So this is the header row, it's repeated on each new page. I want to make a little background color. So I'll take this blue color here. And let's also make the text bold. And I want to make a little, this address here, also the name, a little bit larger. Then we need to go to the grouping window in the bottom again, and here we can see all our groups, parent group, customer group, and vendor group. And what I need to do now is I want to be able to see the header row here in this grouping window, and for me to enable this I need to go to this small button over here, very hidden feature, and I'll click advanced mode. And now when I click this static row, I can see that this is the static row that I have selected up here. And for this static row here, I need to set the repeat with group. I need to set this to after. So now it will repeat when the parent group is still on the page, and since the parent group is being repeated on all pages, since all my groups are inside the parent group, this row here will be shown on all my pages. And then I set, of course, repeat on new page. This is what I need to set, and I build and my solution, and then I'll run the report. So let's go back to NAV and run the report and see how this looks. So now I've executed the report, and you can see now I have my header row up here, and I'm on page number 1. So if I go to page number 2, my header row is being repeated. Go to the third page, header row still repeated. Now we're looking at the vendors, we're not looking at customers anymore. and on the last page I still have my header row here. So if we go to the first page, what I want now is I also want to have the customer group header here. I want this to be repeated, and when the vendor starts, I also want this vendor here. I want this on the next page also, so we have the vendor here group shown. So let's go back in Visual Studio and make this change. So we're now back in Visual Studio. We're gonna have the customer group header repeat and the vendor group header repeat. So I select the static row in the customer group, and I can see over here in the tablets that this is the row that I have marked and selected. So that's great, great help from Visual Studio point of view. Then I'll go to my properties over here, and I'll say keep with group, and I'll set this to after, and repeat on new page I set to true. So when I set these two new properties here, then the customer group header will be repeated as long as there's customers in my being printed on my page. So that was very easy. Now we'll go to the vendor group, and we see that we have two static rows here, and we have vendor group details that is not on the same level as the customer group details. Even though these two groups are completely identical to each other, there's something wrong here. So there should only be one static row, and this vendor group details should be on the same indexing level as the customer group details here. But let's try to see if we can do something about this. So I'll just say static, and say keep with group with after. That's fine, and we repeat on new page, and I set this to true. And now I'll build my report, build solution, and we go back in the NAV and we run the report and see how this looks. So when I now execute the report again, and now I should have my customer group header. I should have that repeated. So this row here should be repeated on the next page. So if I go to the next page, so I'm now on the second page, I can see that my customer header has been repeated. Now I also see that my vendor group header starts down here, so all my vendor the data starts here. And if I go to the third page, I can see that my vendor group header is not repeated. So this doesn't work for the vendor, but it works fine for the customer. So we need to fix this for the vendor group as well. So we go back to Visual Studio. So we're back in Visual Studio, and let's try to see if we can get it working by clicking this static row here. This static row that shouldn't really be there, but let's try to see if it works and what error we get. So I'll say repeat with group after, and repeat on new page to true, and then I'll build the solution. And as you can see down in the error list here, I get a strange error that this is not working, and I expected it to work because I want to have my vendor group header. I want this to be repeated on each page. But let me show you how to work around this bug in Visual Studio, how to fix this so your report will look nice. So let's do that now. So to fix this issue, we need to go into the report RDLC. So we need to go to the actual XML layout of the report, and we do this by going up to the Solution Explorer and then right-click the report RDLC and say Open With, and then we select the XML text editor and select OK. In here, we then search for the vendor group details, and we then examine all the templates and the template members, how they will look. I will copy out the customer group details and the vendor group details in Word, and we'll have a look at this and compare and see which of these rows here are actually too many, and then we'll delete them. So let's go into Word and see how this looks. So when I'm in Word, and on the left side, I've copied out the customer group details, the XML from the report RDLC. And on the right side, I have copied out the vendor group details, so we can compare this. And we know the customer group details works fine, so we are happy about this. And we know that the vendor group details is not working. It has the vendor group details indented one level too much, and it was having an extra tablets member or an extra static row, which we did not want to have. So I want to delete a few of these unnecessary tablets and members and tablet member tags that are not necessary. So I need to delete these two rows, and then I need to delete these two rows. And then I need to indent out the Tablix group member, so it now looks like this. So now my XML looks perfect. This is the way I want it to look. And now I'll copy this into to the actual XML in Visual Studio, and I'll save my report. So let's do that now. So again, back in Visual Studio, I've now copied in my updated XML and remove the unnecessary Tablix members and Tablix member tags that was not necessary, that Visual Studio created for me unnecessarily. So I've deleted those, and if I now go to the design of my report and I go down to my static row, I see that I only have a static row here for my vendor group, and I have a static group for my customer group, and my vendor group details has now in the same identity level as the customer details. So my report looks perfect now, and I just want to verify that the static is set to keep a group after, keep repeat on new page, and it is. So my reports should work now. So let's build the report. So we'll build the report, and then we go back to NAV and we run the report, and we're pretty much done now. So let's do that now. So now I executed the report again, and we should now have our header row for the overall Tablix repeat. We should have our customer group header repeat. So we go to the next page. So both the header Tablix is repeating, the group header is repeating, the customer group is finishing on this page, and the vendor group starts, and we have a vendor group heading that comes here, and this vendor group heading should now repeat on the next page. So let's see, pray, and it is. So we have the header row of the Tablix, and we have the group header for the vendor now also being repeated. And let's go to the next page, and we see that it's also being repeated here. So it's now time to summarize. In step number 1, we have seen how to create 3 text constants in NAV and how to place them in the dataset. 1 in the integer parent group, 1 in the customer group, and 1 in the vendor group. So we can use these for grouping when we're designing our report. In step number 2, we have seen how to create a parent group with 2 adjacent child groups and how to add detailed rows to each child group. We've also seen how to filter each group, so only rows in the datasets which belong to the group are shown. In step number 3, we have seen how to repeat the header row in the Tablix on each new page, and we have seen how to repeat the customer group header, the vendor group header, on each new page as long as the group is printing. And at last, we have seen how to work around the bug when Visual Studio is creating unnecessary static rows in our layout. I really hope you enjoyed this How Do I video. I'm Klaus Lundstrøm, MVP for Microsoft Dynamics NAV. Thanks for watching.